I'm a grad student who works in an HIV lab. 6 months ago I was exposed to HIV infected blood. Tomorrow I get my follow-up HIV test which will finally tell me if I'm okay or not. Reddit. What's the scariest thing that's ever happened to you? When I was 12, my family and I were returning from a vacation in Mexico. We were in a minivan, driving toward the US border when we noticed 3 cars pulled over on this long ass stretch of highway. A few men were around and they noticed us driving up. One of them moved to the middle of the road and held his hand up to get us to stop, and my dad, who was driving, started to slow down. As we got closer, the man who was attempting to stop us was distracted by something to his left and turned to look at it. That's when we noticed he had an assault rifle. My dad gunned it and blew right by him while telling the family to get down. At the time I thought this was awesome, but now I think about it, we came very close to being carjacked and it's scary as heck. As a guy who has spent a few years living in Zeta-filled border towns, mostly Reynosa and Nuevo Laredo and Tamaulipas, don't stop for anyone, unless maybe it's a federal officer. I power walked off a mountain due to a communication misunderstanding while paragliding in Germany. The chute didn't open for several scary seconds and we almost brushed the side of the cliff. The instructor apparently lost his license as a consequence. 2 years ago, when I was 19, I was diagnosed with ARDS. I was in an incubated drug-induced coma for 5 weeks. After I woke up and recovered I was told that, technically, I should be dead. The odds were 99.5% that I would die, and my grandfather and uncle visited a funeral home to make arrangements for my body. When I was 8 I got E. coli during the Jack-in-the-Box epidemic, which killed 4 kids. At the time, I don't think I was old enough to understand how dangerous it was, but looking back, my parents must have been freaking out. Being diagnosed with cancer at 18, leaving college, and going through 6 months of chemo. Scariest time of my young life, but I'm healthy and happy now. I stepped on a mud wasp's hive when I was about 10 years old, was stung for God only knows how long, but it felt like an hour, collapsed on the ground. Fortunately my mom and her friend were right there and we were all of 5 minutes away from the hospital. I don't remember the car ride at all. My mom carries me towards the hospital. Nurses and EMTs take me and basically start ripping my clothing off as they wheel me into the hospital and sticking me with every needle known to man. I end up with more medical devices poked into me than I knew existed. Then I start choking. Next thing I know a nurse is on top of me punching me in the chest. I start screaming after a few seconds of WTF and the 2 nurses present had to explain to me that my throat had completely swollen shut and the situation was basically my heart needed to last long enough for the epinephrine to kick in. They performed CPR so that they could start preserving brain function the second my throat went back down. Considering I was good as dead anyway once my throat swelled, they basically loaded me with epinephrine. I started seizing and vomiting almost immediately after. This all happened in the course of 15-20ish minutes. After the epinephrine wore off I was basically just under observation until whatever relevant vital signs were in check, but there aren't many scarier places than a hospital bed when you're 10. Just got stung easily over 100 times. Died sort of and had a seizure. I had a boyfriend that stalked me online after we broke up. I brushed it off as him being a psycho butthole until the day he IM'd me in the guise of one of his past hookups. She had just tested HIV+ and said I might want to get tested too. I knew it was him messing with me some more, but that kind of joke isn't the type you ignore. I got tested several times just to be sure and was negative each time. I have donated blood semi-regularly in the years since with no problems. But wait, there's more. Several years later I got a call from the police telling me this same guy is now under investigation for a plan to kill me and my family. There was a period of time where I wondered if I'd find him waiting around where I lived or at my work, or if I'd get a call informing me that my parents had been tortured and killed. It was a bad time. I donated blood once and I was called back and told I tested positive for HIV. I really didn't know anything about it. I wasn't told about false positives. I hadn't ever done any drugs that required needles or even had any kind of intercourse. All I knew was I was surrounded in a room by nurses who were staring at me like it was a wake for a funeral, and they all were telling me I had HIV. I spent a week thinking of all the things that would now be cut out of my life because of this. I went home to my current doc and got tested again, and thankfully, and probably obviously, I didn't have it. That happened to a friend of a friend. The school medical center tried to tell him that he had an STD. He just stared at them saying, "But I didn't have S." A friend of mine worked for an illusionist several years ago who had lions and tigers as part of his act. They're kept in large cages backstage before and after the show. About a week into working there, he's backstage at night and out of the corner of his eye he sees one of the tigers walking through the back. It had somehow gotten out of its cage. A full-grown motherfreaking tiger, casually walking around. He said he stood still, mostly out of fear, and managed to alert the tiger handler that was nearby, who quickly escorted it back to its cage. I assure you I would have crapped my pants if that happened to me. While living in Sri Lanka during the war times, my dad and I were a few hundred meters away from the bombing of our World Trade Center. We were on our bikes when we saw the suicide bombers ran past us and into the buildings. My dad realized something was wrong, so he turned us around and we started to cycle back before the explosion went off. I was 8 years old and I can still hear the people screaming and crying. I am also a grad student and we work with proteins bound to cyanide and azide. A couple of months ago, I was loading a cyanide sample. My hand slipped and the syringe needle poked my finger. My pie made me go to the hospital. Everything turned out fine. It was a very dilute sample and the cyanide was bound. Not free, but it was still really scary for a bit. I led a pretty boring life compared to others. However, I was standing next to a co-worker when a customer put a knife on him. My co-worker just told him, "Put that freaking thing away before the cop 10 feet away from you notices it." Knife was put away, but the cop did notice and arrested him. Turns out it was a fake knife too. Or, one time a customer set fire to our store to get away with stealing something. LPN managers managed to keep it under control in the accessories area. It was mostly smoke by the time the fire department turned up. Half the customers were freaking out and the other half were mad because they couldn't get their items that day. All employees were supposed to help customers out of the store, but I was 7 months pregnant, so I said frick it and walked out of the store and sat in my car. My manager was cool about it, saying she didn't blame me. When I was around 7, my family and I went on a sightseeing outing on the other side of the island I live on. I take up residency in Hawaii. We come up to a scenic point and head over to the safety rails to look out over the coast below. My uncle sees this as a good opportunity to do what he calls fun. He runs up from behind me, grabs my ankles, and holds me out past the safety bars while I'm frozen in fear as I stare downwards towards the coast below. I didn't know how far the drop was, but I knew if I fell, there would be literally 0% chance of survival. At this point I'm screaming my head off while he's laughing and pulls me back in after what seemed like an eternity. Now 16, I look back on that day and laugh, but I can assure you that my 7-year-old self was not so forgiving. When I was about 5 years old, my family and I traveled up to Canada and we went to a park forest type thing and there was wildlife freely roaming about. Being a naive little kid, I tried to pet an elk while he was eating. The next thing I know he's charging me. Luckily, I moved quickly enough to escape its wrath. I remember being deathly afraid of elks after that. You should be on the track team. You outran an evil elk. I got crushed by an ATV and cut my foot pretty much in half. The doctors thought I would lose my leg, but only ended up with a partial amputation. I was teaching in Cambodia, in a village pretty far out from town, and my husband got heat stroke. He stopped sweating, it was like 95 Fahrenheit, and was falling over, and we're out in the middle of nowhere, with nobody who spoke English or anything. We had bikes, but he was in no shape to bike anywhere, and he has a heart condition. It was the first time that it hit me that we were in the middle of nowhere in a developing country, with limited proficiency in the language. Fortunately, we were able to get a ride to town and he was okay in the end, but it was seriously scary. I was born 3 months premature in 1983. At some point I was given a blood transfusion, possibly multiple. I received a letter when I was 18 that because I received blood before Canada started screening for HEP and HIV I had to go for blood tests. I know now that the likelihood that either would go unnoticed in any way for 18 years is dang near impossible, but my 18-year-old brain went off the charts. I freaked out and drank for 2 weeks. Having an anaphylactic shock. I didn't know what was going on at the time. I didn't even know I was allergic to anything, let alone that seriously. I started getting chest pains, and my lips were tingling. I didn't feel too bad at first, but then my throat started closing up. This feels exactly like you would expect it to. Your chest gets tight, it hurts to breathe, you feel like you're not breathing enough air, and like you're drowning, which I've always had a fear of, so your body does the natural thing and goes into panic mode. This only makes the problem worse, of course. My heart rate was 3 times its normal level, as my heart was trying to get enough oxygen to my brain, and I felt like my face was burning. My face swelled up like a tomato too. A rash spread from nothing to cover my entire body within about 15 minutes. My confused, oxygen-deprived brain decided I had meningitis, since I knew the symptoms were fever and rash, and I had no idea what was going to happen next. I genuinely thought I was going to die. Luckily I lived at home then. This happened when I was a teenager, and it was a weekend so my parents were home. My dad drove me to accident and emergency. I vaguely remember being disturbed by the fact that when we got there they whisked me straight to the front of the queue, ahead of all the people with bleeding, gory injuries. Anyway, they put me in a hospital bed, gave me crap tons of antihistamines, and kept me in until I could breathe again and my face had gone back to its regular size and color. Then they let me go home, with a prescription for an EpiPen, which I always carry with me these days. Over the next few months I had lots of allergy tests to try to find out what caused it, but they were all inconclusive, so I still don't know what it is I'm allergic to. My scariest was probably falling off my bicycle in high winds. I was about half an inch away from smashing my face onto a concrete pillar and could do nothing about the fall. I was shaking for hours afterwards. Scariest thing for me was keeping my eyes open as I rolled in a van, as a passenger, going 75 miles per hour. We did 2 full rolls back onto the wheels. I don't recommend this. I got sick one night, and by the next day I was coughing so hard I could barely get a breath in between. I have asthma and was using my inhaler more times than should ever be possible. I fell asleep, feeling awful, and when I woke up my mom took one look at me and decided it was time to see a doctor. Unfortunately, I ended up in the urgent care right across from the hospital, instead of in the ER where I should have been. They took my temperature and it was 105.6. My eyes were solid red, no white at all. At the time I was so sick I can barely remember what happened, but it turns out I had swine flu. To get my temp down they gave me 5 Motrins at once and just left me in the exam room. I remember clearly thinking I was going to die, and deliriously calling my dad, who was out of town, sobbing and apologizing for all the bad crap I've done in my life. I unfortunately don't remember deliriously cussing my friend's mom out over text. Recently I was talking to a doctor and told him that story and he said it was amazing that I survived at all with how awful the medical care I got was. I feel like I got very lucky. Got stuck while foolishly bouldering, climbing lower rocks without a rope, usually for traversing instead of going straight up. I set myself up for the perfect bad situation. Looking back it is near comedic type bad. I did not have the holds to go back or down, or up and over, and I was about 40 feet up and above a mountain stream that had been getting fed by a glacier so it was deep and fast. The stream was about 20 feet wide and washed over a waterfall that was easily 90 feet down to a pile of rocks. If I managed to stay conscious on my first fall, I then had about 20 seconds to make it to the side of the stream and climb out or I was gone. Now would be the right time to mention that the years of erosion had turned the stream bed into something like the bobsled track at the Winter Olympics, so my chances of getting a good grip on the side are low. The scenario sounds outlandish but I was not very clever and in hindsight insane that day. I panicked, hyperventilated, and had to face the thought of there is a really good chance you will die today. I had a cold sweat going on, and had to keep talking to myself to keep from crying melting all the way down. It took me about an hour to cover about 60 feet of rock face heading in my original direction which was upstream. I finally met the glacier that was sitting over the stream and crawled up it until I could get to safe ground. I think the fact it was drawn out makes it the scariest point for me. February 2003. I'm on the border of Kuwait and Iraq. PFC dog-faced killer thought it would be a good idea to have all my mop gear all fricked up. I still had my training filter on my gas mask. Well, I'm doing some outside work and all of a sudden the missile siren goes off. Over the loudspeaker I heard, "This is not a drill." I put on my mop gear and then just knew I was going to die a horrible death. It ended up being that the sensors tripped on something other than a Scud missile. First thing I did when I got back to my tent was lay all my mop gear out and put my real filter on it. Then I practiced putting it all on and taking it off in a timely manner. Horrible way to die, because you decided to be a lazy piece of crap. Got back from donating blood, got a letter in the mail saying I was HIV positive. I didn't get upset, or angry, or scared. I sat on my steps for a few hours wondering how, went to the doctor, and found out I don't have HIV, just a low white blood cell count. The way fear like that hits you isn't how you expect. It was more disappointment than fear, but it definitely took its toll. I got bad salmonella when I was 10, I think, after eating poorly cooked turkey for a Thanksgiving community dinner. The people running the show didn't want to insult the people, so they put it out with everything else and assumed everyone knew pink turkey was bad turkey. Everyone did, except me. Fast forward a few days and I feel like absolute crap. I had no idea why, and then I started to puke, like everything. As soon as I drank or ate anything it came right back up, and when I ran out of food to throw up I was dry heaving for hours. It also came out the other end, furiously. I remember just sitting on the couch and trying to get up to puke in the sink, which caused me to crap my pants and puke all over myself. Not a glorious moment for me. This lasted about a week, and I seriously thought I was gonna die. Imagine not being able to eat or drink anything properly, but being extremely hungry and thirsty. It was horrible. On the bright side, I haven't puked since then, 10 years ago. When I was 11 a piano fell on me and I broke my femur. The fear I experienced while trapped under the piano and feeling the top half of my femur circle around the bottom half as I tried to move my leg was unbelievable. That was the point when I realized crap had gone down and I was fricked. Went to live with family in Pakistan. After a few weeks of having our water boiled, not drinking milk from the street, and in general just having our mother being extra careful, our uncle took us out shopping. We saw a street vendor who was serving an ice cream dessert type of thing. Being kids, we didn't know better and asked for some, and he got us some. I got food poisoning. My middle brother was hospitalized for a week. My oldest brother got typhoid fever and almost died. He was in the hospital for a long while. I don't remember much of it, but I remember him looking like a shell of a kid in the bed and all of our relatives crammed into the hospital room. He recovered just fine though. Moral of the story, if you go to a third world country, don't eat drink things on the street. You have been visited by the distinguished doggo of delicious delicacies. Comment tasty supper, pupper, and be blessed with delectable dishes for the next decade. If you are new to the channel, you can subscribe. I publish new videos every day. Until then, check another video, or don't. Either way, have a great day you magnificent people.